The Meteor Missile is often described as unfair, not because it's particularly stealthy, not because it's particularly large, but once fired, there is a very good chance the pilot on the receiving end is already out of options. It is the most capable beyond visual range air-to-air missiles currently in operation. Powered by a Ramjet engine and capable of speeds well over Mach 4, it carries enough energy in the final moments of flight to almost guarantee it turns enemy fighters into very expensive debris. Unlike most air-to-air missiles that fire their primary motor for all of 10 seconds, the Meteor has an unconventional approach. It keeps accelerating, it keeps manoeuvring, and it keeps threatening targets at range through the use of its ramjet. And considering this innovation was developed by a group of Europeans, it could serve as a model for cooperation on future contracts. The story begins in the 1980s. NATO is staring across the Iron Curtain at thousands of Soviet aircraft and coming to an uncomfortable realization. Air combat has been changing. The era of dogfights is coming to an end. Increasingly, the winner is whoever could shoot first. As covered in other videos, ground-based air defense was lacking in Europe at the time, so aircraft would have to be the ones to take that shot. The Americans had the AIM-120 under development. The Soviets were fielding increasingly capable missiles of their own, like the R-27 Van Pelt. Meanwhile, Europe was doing what Europe does best, holding a meeting. Britain, France and Germany, along with a host of other countries, wanted a future missile capable of outperforming anything the Soviets could field. Unfortunately, they all had slightly different ideas on how to achieve it, which meant years of discussions, arguments and industrial politics. Somewhere in Europe there probably is still a conference room where people are debating missile specifications from 1989. The original requirements were fairly straightforward. Why there was confusion is a mystery. Build a missile that could destroy an enemy aircraft at longer ranges than existing systems. Easy enough in theory, the problem was physics and politics. Traditional air-to-air missiles relied on rocket motors, burning all of their fuel within the first few seconds of flight, and then coasting towards the target. It worked well enough, but as the range increased, the missile would gradually lose energy, so by the time it reached the maximum range, it was often moving significantly slower and had less ability to maneuver. This is what pilots call a no-escape zone, an area where the target cannot realistically evade the missile once it's been launched. Because of this, missiles are easier to evade at longer ranges. Pilots can deeply dive, gaining airspeed, and then fly away from the missile's launch site until it runs out of energy. The solution to this is obvious if you're a missile engineer. Instead of using a conventional rocket motor, use something with constant impulse. A ramjet is essentially an engine that turns oncoming airflow into thrust. The faster you go, the better it works. The downside is that they tend to suck at low speeds. The upside is once they get moving, they can keep producing thrust for a very long time. They are very fuel efficient, which means that the missile can maintain high speed through the entirety of its flight, becoming increasingly useful as range increases. Several companies had proposed concepts through the 1990s, but the competition eventually narrowed to a handful of designs. The Americans, naturally, suggested buying AMRAAMs. Europe, having spent decades complaining about dependence on American weapon system, decided to ignore their suggestion, with the winning design coming from the consortium that would eventually become MBDA. Every missile in the 1990s onwards eventually gets made by MBDA, by the way, but their proposal coming from a throttleable ducted rocket, essentially a ramjet missile, that could regulate its own thrust during flight. This was important for air combat because it's not a straight line. Enemy aircraft have this very nasty habit of turning and flying away. Almost like getting blown up isn't all that much fun. By adjusting thrust throughout the engagement, the missile can conserve energy in early flight and then unleash maximum performance during the final intercept. This dramatically increases the no-escape zone compared to conventional missiles. The development wasn't exactly smooth. Nothing involving 6 countries ever is. Every nation wanted a piece of the pie. They wanted the jobs, they wanted the factories, they wanted the tax revenue, and most importantly for all, they wanted the GDP figures. All of this occurred in the phase where European countries viewed the military as a low-skill jobs program and hadn't invented the concept of a fake university degree. Yet, despite the bureaucracy, development continued. In 2003, nations formally signed on. Testing through the 2000s demonstrated that the concept actually worked, which is fortunate because by this point they had invested a significant amount of money, and explaining to taxpayers why it had failed would have been awkward. But the missile finally entered service in the 2010s, initially equipping aircraft such as the Gripen, the Rafale, and the Eurofighter Typhoon. Physically, Meteor is fairly conventional. It weighs around 190 kilos and is approximately 3.7 meters long, carrying a blast fragmentation warhead designed to remove enemy aircraft from existence. What makes it special isn't size, but of course it's its propulsion. It's been covered a lot. The Ramjet allows the Meteor to sustain speeds above Mach 4 whilst retaining energy deep into the engagement envelope. MBDA claim that it possesses a no-escape zone several times larger than competing missiles. Whilst exact figures remain classified, and the fact that nobody seems particularly eager to test the claims personally, this is all probably a good sign. Guided by an active radar seeker and linked to the launch aircraft through a two-way data link, Meteor can receive target updates through much of its flight. This means that the launching aircraft doesn't necessarily need to illuminate the target continuously. In simple terms, the missile is smart enough to keep receiving directions even after the missile leaves the rail, which is useful when someone is trying very hard to shoot back. Today, Meteor serves a growing number of forces across Europe and beyond. It equips the Eurofighter, the Rafale, the Gripen, and is currently being integrated onto the F-35. But how is it actually performing? Operational details are naturally limited because air-to-air missiles tend not to generate the same kind of public footage as a tank exploding in the middle of a field, along with the fact that air forces are strangely secretive about revealing exactly how they intend to kill one another. This is in combination with the fact that none have been sent to Ukraine, as they have not been set up for use by Western fighters by fighters used by the Ukrainians. But it has been alleged that Sweden will ship Gripens with the missiles in the next couple of years, so we might get some updates on that. Along with the fact that unlike any other air-to-air missile, it's never been formally tested for use in the surface-to-air role. This is possibly due to the fact it costs €2 million each, and at that price point you may as well just use Aster or Patriot, which is designed for the job. But strategically, Meteor has become one of the most significant developments in air combat over the last 2 decades. It effectively forces potential opponents to rethink engagement distances, as the aircraft that might have previously felt comfortable operating outside their threat envelope of conventional missiles now have to consider the possibility that a Meteor-equipped fighter could reach out much further than expected. In many ways, the missile represents a rare success story for European defence cooperation, as instead of producing 6 different mediocre missiles at enormous expense, Europe has managed to produce one genuinely world-class system at enormous expense.